In today's video, I will be going over pros and cons of every single ANEMO character in Genshin Impact, and I will also be making this video for every character of each element in the upcoming days, and you can check out the other 3 videos for GEO, HYDRO and DENDRO that I've already uploaded, so consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the next videos for all the other elements and help my channel grow for more and improved content in the future. And a special thanks to everyone who has subscribed in the past few days. I appreciate every single one of you guys. With all that being said, let's get into it. Starting off with the ANEMO Archon, Venti. For his pros, he has one of the best bursts for crowd control in the game, and he can apply high amounts of elemental application due to his burst swirling at a quick pace. Very flexible for most teams and doesn't require to be on field consistently, since you can spam his burst every rotation and swap off him and use another character. His elemental skill has a fairly low cooldown and can generate a good amount of energy particles, and is fun to use in exploration and open world. For his cons, not the best unit when it's against bigger and heavier opponents that his burst cannot pull in. An elemental burst can sometimes land in an awkward position. If you have close range or physical DPS characters on your team, his burst can make enemies unreachable for a considerable amount of time for those characters. But overall a great unit for many teams and has one of the best roles even after so many units have been added into the game. Next character is Sucrose. For her pros, she can provide amazing elemental mastery buff for your team, which enhances the elemental reactions, and she can be a good ANEMO battery for the team as well. She can also provide good crowd control with her skill and her burst as well, and doesn't need high investment on her talents, and even at lower levels, she can provide many undeniable values for your team. For her cons, Burst has 80 energy costs that without the proper energy recharge built into her artifact substats can be a bit difficult and tricky to have it in every rotation. Her Burst can have inconsistent elemental absorption for the right reactions, and Constellation 1 and Constellation 4 is kind of necessary to help her with energy hungry team comps to regenerate more particles. But overall a really valuable character for a lot of different team comps, and you can probably use her in any team that you want. Next one is Jean. For her pros, she's relatively easy to build. She's a decent DPS and crowd control character and can self-cleanse with her elemental burst. She's a flexible character that, same as most ANEMO units, can be used in most teams for support or DPS. And she's also very effective at healing her team with her burst that can heal her and her entire party fairly well. For her cons, she has low individual damage potential due to her base stats being low, and Ascension stat don't make her that much better, brings less utility and buffs for most teams in comparison to other characters like Sucrose, Venti and Kazuha. But if you need a healer that can dish out some good damage, she won't let you down. Next one on the list, as you guys can probably tell, my favorite character in the game, Kazuha. And for his pros, he can greatly boost the elemental damage of the entire team when he's paired and utilized by using the 4-piece Viridescent set, and he can significantly increase your entire team's damage output, can gather enemies close to you to perform multiple combos with different characters, and unlike Venti that can make enemies unreachable, he brings them closer into a circle and make them reachable for many characters. And you can also use a free-to-play craftable weapon like Iron Sting that doesn't even require refinements and is quite effective. For cons, without his Constellation 1, his cooldown may affect the crowd control capabilities, but it's not a major downside. An elemental mastery buff is also locked behind Constellations, and at C0 only damage bonus can be boosted and not the elemental mastery, and he can't have the role of main DPS even with Constellations, but he's a fantastic support, and I would highly recommend pulling on his banner whenever he's available, because he's a game changer for almost any account out there, so don't miss out if you had the opportunity. Next up on the list, Faruzan. For her pros, she's one of the few sources for ANEMO damage percent buff, and she also has ANEMO resistance shred and can provide slight crowd control in some situations. And for her cons, she's very Constellation reliant, also needs a lot of energy recharge available for her, and her team cons are limited and only work in certain niche teams. And the attack scaling of her kit doesn't make much sense since she is a support unit based on the rest of her kit. Overall, I wouldn't say you need this character on your team unless you have a character like Wanderer. Next up, we have Sayu, and for pros, can work well with 4-piece Viridescent set and can provide healing while inflicting ANEMO damage to enemies, but she's mostly used for her fun elemental skill in the open world, and for cons, she isn't particularly good in any team, and she does not provide many benefits, which makes her not comparable to a lot of similar units, but I have to admit the elemental skill is really fun for exploration, and I also can't think of many teams that can benefit from having her in the team, so I don't have much to say about this character. Let's get into the next one. Next character is Heizou. He's a decent DPS unit with a really good elemental skill, great as a driver due to his fluid attacks and low stamina cost charge attacks as well, and his passive talent, Penetrative Reasoning, provides a good elemental mastery buff to his teammates, and being an Anemo Catalyst user enables strong support artifacts and weapon options such as 4-piece Viridescent, which works really well on him. And for his cons, his individual normal attacks without triggering swirl can be underwhelming, and fairly long cooldown on his skill, which makes it a bit inconsistent. Does not provide many supporting capabilities like kazuha or sucrose, and even though he's a catalyst user, he doesn't quite have a long range attack like sucrose or wanderer. He's overall a fun and underrated character, and if you're bored, I would highly suggest building him for at least the fun of it. Next character, Xiao. For pros, he has a fairly simple yet sort of fun gameplay if you like his plunge attacks, and he can cover a large AoE with his plunging during his burst and doesn't require a strong team for his supports, since he can deal a good amount of damage as a DPS and doesn't necessarily require reactions for his damage output to be amazing. And for cons, energy management is needed for consistency, and his plunge attacks can push enemies away and sometimes make it harder to hit them when you need to, and he needs a lot of on-field time because of his long burst duration, so his team comps are limited and lacks supporting capabilities and needs a lot of investment either with weapons or artifact stats for him to be a hyper carry for your account or a particular team. Next character, Wanderer. For his pros, he's excellent for single target DPS capabilities, and he's a solid unit against multiple enemies when paired with Kazuha or Venti, and more flexible for team comps compared to Xiao as a hyper carry, and has high multipliers on his attacks, which makes his damage skyrocket with good support and investment, and normal attacks have good tracking and long range as well, and he also provides great open world exploration gameplay since he has the floating ability that can come in handy in most situations in open world, and doesn't consume stamina for charge attacks in midair, which means you can trigger a lot of swirl reactions at a fairly quick time. And for cons, needs a character like Faruzan for his maximum potential, and needs a shielder since he can easily get interrupted while attacking, and doesn't provide crowd control and relies on units like Kazuha and Venti to do it for him, and quite expensive to get the most value out of him since you need all three of his talents leveled. His elemental mastery scaling isn't that good, making his swirling capabilities feel quite lackluster in some situations, but overall a really fun and great unit to have, especially if you need a main DPS with some utility for your team as well. Next character, Lynette. For pros, she can provide a powerful anemo attack while being off field and can provide additional taunts for enemies, and the elemental skill is good for exploration as well, and she can also buff the attacks of the team depending on the numbers of the element in the party, and decent character for reaction focused team comps as well. For her cons, high energy costs while being reliant on her burst, her buffs are not that significant like so many other support units, and crowd control is locked behind constellations, but I would say since she's a free unit, she's a solid unit if you don't have many ANEMO options, more specifically for newer players that can benefit from her kit even more. And our last character, ANEMO version of Traveler. For pros, this character can complete the constellations by finishing the Archon quest and leveling the Statue of 7, which is always a positive for Traveler that can have C6 at any time after you progress through the story, and can be a good support unit especially early in the game, and has fairly decent swirling capabilities in the early game. For cons, this character might push enemies too far away with CLM burst, which means you have to run around chasing them, and the scaling between ANEMO and physical can make the damage potential quite lackluster, but early on can help a lot for any account since you don't really have access to better ANEMO units, so it's not a bad character overall, but not really a good one for players that have played for quite some time and isn't really worth the high investment, especially if you have a lot of good ANEMO units like Kazuha, Venti, and Sucrose. And with that, we briefly covered pros and cons of every single anime character. Don't forget to watch the other parts that I've already made, and for the future videos for each element and more Genshin Impact content, consider liking and subscribing. And if you have any suggestions or anything you want me to make a video about, let me know down below in the comments, and have a good day or night, and peace.